not here because they're on a date night, so might not have anybody. It would be nice if I could get like Doodly to come. That'd be nice. Oh, good. Woke up in time just to eat, then came. Oh, nice. That's sweet. That's cool. Thank you. Hold on a second. Let me do something real quick. Let me do one more thing. Oh well. I don't know if Dooley's awake. I'm gonna share it to him again and say, then we're gonna start reading. See if I can find him in here. There he is. There they are. Oh my gosh. There we go. I sent it to them. All right. Let's stop this. Okay. Should we start? Let's start. All right, Black Marxism. Making of a Black Radical Tradition. Well, the making of a Black Radical Tradition. I keep the messing up with the. Hello. Let's see, do I still have someone in my comments? Yeah, I'll bring up the duel. Okay, they're not coming up. All right, the lower orders. Just as the Western European middle class were suspended in webs of state parochialism, so too was the vast majority of European peoples. The lower orders, the class that ruled the nobility by its orchestration of the instrumentalities. I'm gonna make sure. Right back. Instrumentalities, of the state imprinted its character on the whole of European society. And since much of that character had to do with violence, the lower orders were woven into the tapestry of a violent social order. By the nature of hierarchical societies, the integration of the lower classes, wage laborers, peasants, serfs, slaves, vagabonds, and beggars into the social, political, and economic order of an absolute state was on the terms of the clients of the latter. The function of the laboring classes were to provide the state and its privileged classes with the material and human resources needed for their maintenance and further accumulation of power and wealth. This was not, however, a simple question of the dominance of a ruling class over the masses. The masses did not exist as such, as earlier Greek and Roman thinkers had created a totalizing construction of the barbarians. The feudal nobilities of Western Europe had inspired and authored a similar myth. Frederick Hertz has reported that, and this is him, in the Middle Ages and later, the nobility, as a rule, considered themselves a better blood than the common people, whom they utterly despised. The peasants were supposed to be the descendant from Ham, who, for lack of fennel classes, petty, was known to have been condemned by Noah to slavery. The knightly classes of many lands, on the other hand, believed themselves to be the descendants of the Trojan horses, who, after the fall of Troy, were said to have settled in England, France, and Germany. This theory was seriously maintained, not only in numerous songs and tales of knightly deeds, but also in many scholarly works. It was It was a form of this notion that Count Gobelin revived in the mid-19th century, extended its conceptualization of superiority so as to include elements of the bourgeoisie. The nobilities of the 16th century, however, provided too much to be more circumspect about, quote, the masses, end quote, than the genealogical legends might imply. They did not become victims of their own mythic creation. When it came to the structures of the state, their knowledge of the social, cultural, and historical composition of the masses was exquisitely refined. Oh, let's see what's in here. Get a Z's. Perhaps this is no more clear demonstrated than in the one of the most critical areas of state activity, the monopolization of force. The absolutist state was a cause and effect of war. The economy was a war economy. Its foreign trade was combative. Its bureaucracy administrated the preparations and persecution of war. Such a state required standing armies and eventually navies. But for certainly political and sometimes economic reasons, soldiers could not be recruited easily from, in V.G. Karinian's phrases, quote, the mass of ordinary peasants and burghers. Karinian puts the situation most simply for France, though it was the same all over Europe. Frenchmen were seldom eager to serve their king, and their king was not eager to employ Frenchmen. Loyalty to the state of the monarchy from the exploited ranks of the lower classes was rare. In any case, not one state of the 16th or 17th century was reliant on such an identification between the masses and the higher rulers. The soldiers of the armies of France, Spain, England, Holland, Prussia, Poland, Sweden, and at first Russia were either alien to the states for which they fought and policed, or very marginal to them. European governments relied very largely on foreign mercenaries. One of the employments of which they were particularly well suited at was the suppression of rebellious subjects, and in the 16th century, the age of endemic revolution, they were often called upon for this purpose. Governments had to look either to backward areas for honest, simple-minded fellows, untainted by political ideas, or to foreigners. Depending then on changing fortunes, the, quote, identities of the combatants, the geopolitics of wars, and the mercenaries were drawn from among the Swiss, the Scots, the Picardians, Bretons, Flemings, Welsh, Basque, Meverasi, Gallowayans, I don't know how to say these, Delmontans, Corsicans, Burgundians, Goldrains, the Irish, Czechs, Croatians, Magyars, and from Gascony, Algoe, Norway, and Albania. That's so many. Such one function and result of the work of these mercenaries was the suppression of subject peoples. The degree of their success is directly indicated by their own absence, for the most part, for the political geography of modern Europe. The absolute state, or its direct successors, the instrument that propelled them into prominence in the 16th and 17th century, for France, into a late 18th century, ultimately absorbed the autonomous sectors from which the mercenaries originated. In the armies of the 6th century, native recruits distributed among the foreign mercenaries were also chosen with an eye to minimizing the political and social risk of the monarchy and its ally allied nobility. In France, the army drew its volunteers from the least national, most nondescript types, the dregs of the poorest classes. Corinthians inform us, in Spain, the hills of Aragon and the Basque province served a similar function. In Britain, until the mid-18th century, the Scottish Highlands were the most frequent sites of recruitment, and the Welsh soldiers skilled became legendary. Important as the formation of these armies was for the construction of the state that dominated Europe for more than 200 years, we must not be diverted from their more historical importance by the romantic richness of the social and political drama to which they contributed. Louis the 11th innovation in 1494 of organizing a, quote, French infantry without Frenchmen was revolutionary in scale, not in character. The tactic of composing armies from mercenaries and from marginal peoples and social strata extended back into the Middle Ages and earlier. Imperial armies, republican armies, bandit armies, invading armies, and defending armies, the armies of rebellious slaves, of nobles, and even of the chauvinist medieval cities, all laid claim to, or incorporated to some extent, souls from whom they had at best few considerations in less intense times. More significantly, in reviewing this phenomenon for the 16th and later centuries, the point is not that mercenaries were recruited from the outside and from among those least secure internally. This is simply the best documented form of a more generalized pattern of structural formation and social integration. The important meaning is that this form of enlisting human reserves was not peculiar to military apparatus, but extended throughout Europe to domestic service, handicrafts, industrial labor, and ship and dock workers of merchant capitalism, the field of laborers of agrarian capitalism. There has never been a moment in modern European history, if before that migratory or immigrant labor was not a significant aspect of European economies. That this is not more widely understood seems to be a consequence of conceptualization and analysis. The mistaken use of the nation as a social, historical, and economic category as a resultant and persistent reference of national labor pools, e.g., quote, the English working class, end quote, and a subsequent failure of historical investigation. Wallerstein, in his otherwise quite detailed study of the origin of capitalist world system, can devote a mere page to this phenomenon, including a single paragraph on the ethnic divisions of 16th century immigrant labor, and through compelled to acknowledge that, quote, not much research seems to have been done in the ethnic distribution of the urban working class of earlier modern Europe. He goes on to speculate that Kazimierz Tymiecki's description of systematic ethnic distinctions of rank within the working class, quote, in the towns of the 16th century, East Elba is typical of the whole of the world economy, end quote. Despite the paucity of study, there are historical records that tend to confirm this view. We discover in them Flemish cloth workers in early 16th century London, and later in the 16th and in the 17th century, Huguenots, refugees, 40,000 to 80,000 of them, many of them handloom weavers, fleeing France and settling in special fields in London's East End, and thus establishing England's silk industry. In the 18th and 19th century, Irish workers, quote, formed a core of the floating armies and laborers who built canals and the docks, the railways, and transformed the face of England. And again, on the European continent, as German farm workers and peasants were drawn to urban and industrial sectors of Central and Western Germany, Polish labor was used to fill the vacuum of East Germany. France and Switzerland also recruited heavily from Poland, Italy, and Spain. And of course, the formation of industrial corps in the United States before the Civil War located immigrant workers from northern Italy, Germany, Scotland, and Ireland. And after the Civil War, from southern Italy and the lands of Eastern, Northern, and Central Europe, Russia, Finland, Poland, Greece, and the Balkans. Perhaps the only unique aspect of North American industrial recruitment was the appearance of Asian workers beginning in the late 19th century from China, Japan, and the Philippines. We begin to perceive that the nation is not a unit of analysis for social history of Europe. The state is a bureaucratic structure, and the nation of which it administers is more a convenient construct than the historical, racial, cultural, or linguistic entities that term nation signifies. The true character of European history resides beneath the phenomenology of nation and state. With respect of the construction of modern capitalism, one must forget the particular identities, the particular social movements, and the societal structures that have persisted and or have profoundly influenced European life. Although Western Europe had acquired a great richness of forms of corporate life, a greater crystallization of habits into institutions than any known elsewhere. It had a remarkable ability to forge societal ties more tenacious than almost any other part from those of the family and its extension, clan and caste, ties that could survive from one epoch to another and to be built into more elaborate combinations. But along with fixity of particular relationships went on less radical instability of the system as a whole. European civilization is not the product of capitalism. On the contrary, the character of capitalism can only be understood in the social and historical context of its appearance. All right. Oh, there we got someone coming up. All right. The effects of Western civilization on capitalism. Now, notice we're just going through the development. We're at the earlier stages of this. The development of capitalism can thus be seen as having been determined, informed by the social and ideological composition of the civilization that had assumed its fundamental perspectives during feudalism. The patterns of recruitment for slave and mercenaries we have reviewed held true for bourgeoisie and proletariats. According to Robert Lopez, in the Carolingian Empire, long-distance trade was dominated by Jewish and Italians. In the medieval Europe, Lopez and Irvin Raymond have documented the importance of Mediterranean traders at international fairs, and the development of foreign merchant houses in the towns of the hinterland. Fernand Braudel amplifies. Many financial centers, Pisa, sprang up in Europe in towns that were of recent origin. But if we look more closely at these sudden and quite considerable developments, we shall find that they were in fact ramifications of Italian banking that had by then become traditional. In the days of the fairs of campaign, it was already the bankers of what?
The person's name is it is Champagne. Sorry, it's champagne.
Yep. Is already the banker of Senia, Lucca, Florence, and Genoa, who held the money changers' scales. It was they who made the fortune in Geneva in the 5th century, and later those of Antwerp, Lyons, and Madia el Campo. In short, throughout Europe, a small group of well-informed men kept in touch by an activity, correspondence, controlled the entire network of exchange in bills or species, thus dominating the field of commercial speculation. So we should not be too taken in by the apparent spread of finance, quote unquote. For Spain under Charles V, 1516 to 56, and Philip II, 1556 to 98, the German Fuggers and Genoese and other international merchant firms, quote unquote, organized the state revenues, exploited mines, they administered many of the most important estates. And in Constantinople, Genoese, Vetentine, and Ragusian bankers, the merchants shepherded the trade of financial relations between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. For the Mediterranean towns of the 16th century, Brudul has observed the function of the indispensable immigrant. To Salonika, Constantinople, and Volena, Italian and Spanish Jewish people, as merchants and artisans, brought new trade to further broaden an already multicultural bourgeoisie. There were other valuable immigrants. Oh my gosh. Itinerant.
It's itinerant.
Itinerant artists, for instance, attached by expanding towns which were extending their public buildings, or merchants, particularly the Italian merchants and bankers who activated and indeed created such cities as Lisbon, Cervelli, Medea del Campo, Lyons, and Antwerp, and in Venice. A long report by the Cynic Sava in January 1607 indicates that all capitalist, quote-unquote, activity has, as we should call it, was in the hands of the Florentines, who owned houses in the city, and the Genoese, who provided silver, between them controlling all exchanges. Just as Nuremberg had ravaged Bohemia, Saxon, and Silesia, and Brudel asserts it was the Genoese who quote, blocked the development of Spanish capitalism, end quote. It was to the indispensable immigrant who contemplated the urban proletariat incapable of maintaining itself, let alone increasing without the help of continuous immigration. In Ragusa, it was the Moralacci. In Marseilles, and the Corsicans. In Sevilles, the Morasacos of, Aldulasua. In Algiers, the Aragonases and the Berbers. In Lisbon, black slaves. And in Venice, the immigrant proletariat was augmented by, Romagolani, Marchanani, Greeks, Persians, Armenians, and Portuguese Jewish people. The bourgeoisie that led the development of capitalism were drawn from particular ethnic and cultural groups. The European proletariat and the mercenaries who of the leading states from others, its peasants from still other cultures, and its slaves from entirely different worlds. The tendency of European civilization through capitalism was thus not to be homogenized, but to but to indifferentiate, to exaggerate regional subculture and dialectical differences into racial ones. As the Slavs became the natural slaves, the radically inferior stock for domination and exploitation during the early Middle Ages, as the Tartars came to occupy a similar position in the Italian cities and in the late Middle Ages, so at the systematic interlocking of capitalism in the 16th century, the people of the developing world began to fill this expanding category of a civilization reproduced by capitalism. As a civilization of free and equal beings, Europe was as much a fiction in the 19th century and later, as its very unity had been during the, Merovingian and the Carolingian areas. I can't say these words. Both the church and the more powerful nobilities of the Holy Roman Empire and its predecessors had been the source of the illusion in those earlier periods. From the 12th century forward, it was the bourgeoisie and the administrators of the state power who initiated and neutered myths of egalitarianism while seizing every what were you going to say? Were you going to say something?
Nurtured.
Yes, thank you. While seizing every occasion to divide peoples for the purpose of their domination. You got to speak up just a little bit more, because sometimes you come in and I can't hear what you're saying. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. The carnage of wars and revolution participated by the bourgeoisie of Europe to sanctify their masquerade was enormous. Eventually, however, the old instruments gave way to newer ones, not because they were old, but because the end of feudalism and the expansion of capitalism and its world system, that is, the increasingly uneven character of development among European peoples themselves and between Europeans and the world beyond, participated new oppositions while providing new opportunities and demanding new historical agents. The Reformation in Western Europe and then England that destroyed the last practical vestige of a transcendent unified Christendom were one manifestation of this process of disequilibrium. In England, for an instance, representatives of the great landowners and agrarian capitalists in pursuit of their own social and financial destinies disciplined first the church and then the monarch, and finally the masses. Through enclosures, the poor laws, debtors, prisons, transportation, enforced immigration, and the like. The contrast of wealth and power between labor and capital and the middle class had become stark to sustain and continue maintenance of privileged classes at home and the support of the engines of capitalist domination abroad. New mystifications, more appropriated to the times, were required, authorized by new lights. The delusions of medieval citizenship, which had been expanded into shared patrimony and has persisted for 5 centuries in Western Europe as the single great leveling principle, were to be supplanted by race, and to use the German phrase Herrenvolk. In the 17th and 18th century, the functions of this later ideological construction were related but different. Race became largely the rationalization for the domination, exploitation, and or extermination of non-Europeans, including Slavs and Jewish people. And we shall have occasion in part 2 to explore this application beyond Europe, and particularly to African people more closely. But while we remain in Europe, on European soil, it is Herrenvolk that matters. The 18th century England, Reginald horsemen, seeing its beginnings in the mythical Anglo-Saxonism that was flown as an ideological pundit by the Whig intelligentsia. In France, for example, Paul de Ruppin, Thorsa, and Montesquieu, and before then Francisco Hotman and Count Hurin de Bolivar. In Germany, oh my gosh, Heder, Finch, oh my gosh, Schelmencher, and Hegel. In North America, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, bourgeoisie ideologists, displayed the idea of a heroic Germanic race. All right, I got to appeal already. Look at me appealing. Here was I. Okay, and the idea swept through 19th century Europe, gathering momentum and artifice through such effect as Sir Walter Scott's historical novel of Frederick von Schegel's philosophical fables. Inevitably, of course, the idea was dressed in the encounterment.
Accoutrement. It's a French word. Accoutrement.
Accoutrement? And then what is that word? We're gonna look it up.
Okay.
They say accoutrements.
Yeah, but it's a French word. That's how an English person would say it. It's a counterment.
It's an additional term item that it's an additional item of equipment, clothing, or accessories used for specific active roles or to enhance a scene. That's what I got. I get of the 19th century European science. Henrienvolk explained the inevitability of the naturalness of the domination of some Europeans by other Europeans, though he reconstructed the pieces back to front. Louis Schneider, for one, recognized the effect. Racialists, not satisfied with merely proclaiming the superiority of the white over the person of color, race, also felt it necessary to erect a hierarchy within the white race itself. To meet this need, they developed the myth of the Aryan or Nordic superiority. The Aryan myth in turn became the source of other secondary myths, such as the Teutonism, Germany, Anglo-Saxonism, England and the United States, and Celticism and Celticism in France. Thanks for the follow. Then in the 19th century, modern nationalism appeared. The emergence of nationalism was again neither accidental nor unrelated to the character that European capitalism had assumed historically. Again, the bourgeoisie of particular cultures and political structures refused to acknowledge their logical and systematic identity as a class. Instead, international capitalism persisted in competitive anarchy. Each national bourgeoisie opposed the other as natural enemies, but as powerful as the bourgeoisie and its allies in the aristocracy and bureaucracy might be in some way, they still required the cooperation of other rational proletarian in order to destroy their competitors. Nationalism mobilized the armed might they require to either destroy the productive capacities of those whom they oppose or to secure new markets, new labor, and productive resources. Ultimately, the uneven development of national capitalism would have horrifying consequences for both Europe and peoples under European domination. In Germany and Italy, their national bourgeoisie were relatively late in their formation. The marshalling of national social forces peasants, farmers, workers, clerics, professional classes, the aristocracy, and the state was accomplished by the ideological, oh, here you go, you might want to need help with this, phantasmagoria.
So close. Phantasmagoria.
Yes, of race, Huron-Valk, and nationalism. This compost of violence in its time became known under name of fascism. With the creation of fascism, the bourgeoisie retained the full range of its social, political, and economic prerogatives. Prerogatives?
Yes.
Okay, it had the cake and the total control of its national security, social society, an efficient instrument for expanding its domination and exploration of the developing world, and the ultimate mean. What?
Expropriation.
Thank you. And the ultimate means of redressing the injuries and humiliations of the past. Again, not unexpectedly, slavery was a form of labor would appear in Europe, but this goes far beyond our immediate purpose. What concerns us is that we understand that racialism and its permutations persisted, rooted not in a particular era, but in the civilization itself. And though our era might seem a particularly fitting one for depositing the origins of racism, that judgment merely reflects how resistant the idea is to examination, and how powerful and natural its specification have become. Our confusion, however, are not unique. Did you say something again?
Nope.
No. Yeah. As an enduring principle of European social order, the effects of racialism were bound to appear in social expression of every strata of every European society, no matter the structures upon which they were formed. None was immune. And as we shall observe in the next 2 chapters, this proved to be true for the rebellious proletariat as well as the radical intelligentsia. It was again a quite natural occurrence in both instances, but to the latter, the radical intelligentsias, it was also an unacceptable one subsequently denied. Nevertheless, it insinuated itself into their thought and their theories. Thus, in the quest for a radical social force, an active historical subject, it compelled certain blindness, bemusements that in turn systematically subverted their analytical construction of the revolutionary project. But this is still to be shown. To that end, we will now turn to the history of English working class, since these workers were one of the centerpieces for the development of radical intelligentsias of the notion of the proletariat as a revolutionary class, an inquiry into the effects of racialism on their conscious forms, and the next step in the demonstration of the limits of European radicalism. All right, chapter 2. Any questions before I move on? Chapter 2. Doesn't look like it. No questions? All right.
No
Chapter
question.
2. The English working class as a mirror of production. Until quite recently, much of what was generally known about the appearance of the industrial working class in England and presumed about the development of class consciousness among them was enveloped by ideological mists and historical simplifications. This may be because the creator of heroic sagas of tragedy and triumph, whether the liberal or radical sort, frequently find close attention to history confining historical inquiries, however, does have its rewards, often unexpected ones. Nevertheless, no small amount of historical consideration have been given to the English working class, for this abundant materials, we will attempt to a comprehension of the material and social factors that impinged on the development of working class consciousness, the mirror of production, and the forms it assumes in the 18th and 19th century. We shall be guided, hopefully, less by what we have been led in the abstract to expect such should have occurred than by what did. Expropriation, impoverishment, alienation, and the formation of class consciousness and the expression will be treated not as abstractions or as residual effects of a system of production, but as living categories. We are concerned with how real men and women and children experience dislocation, poverty, and exploitation of their labor and reenact them how they employed the intellectuals and emotional inventories available to them to come to terms with their experience. For that purpose, I shall endeavor to keep this inquiry to the framing declaration about the English working class made by E.P. Thompson 20 years ago. The working class made itself as much as it was made. Further, he summarizes, class consciousness is the way in which the experience are handled in cultural terms, embodied in traditions, value systems, and ideas and institutional forms. If the experience appears as determined, class consciousness does not. Class is defined by men as they live their own history, and in the end, this is its only definition. And since I have argued that among these cultural terms was racialism, I shall hold Thompson to his word. But first, it is important to lay aside certain beliefs about the circumstances in which the English industrial working class made their appearance. When one reviews the appearance of socialism in the 19th century, we are repeatedly informed by its historians that the movement and its ideologies began with the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. However, the ease by which so many students of socialism have arrived at this association between the multifaceted ideal and the twined catalyst of modernity is somewhat dissipated by a closer look at the more concrete realities that lay behind these abstractions and sudden, irreversible change. The Industrial Revolution, for one, was never quite the phenomenon it has become in the hands of some of its historians and in the popular mind. Much has been questioned since the popularization of the phrase of Arnold Toynbee's Industrial Revolution 1884. Still the legend lingers. One might begin by noting that the large-scale technical, economic, and social changes of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, which are now most frequently referred to as an industrial revolution, affected the whole of Britain's empire, as well as part of Western Europe. This suggests that to comprehend the scale on which this revolution operated requires a sense that is involved more than the introduction of new techniques of production, the recruitment, training, and disciplining of labor and transportation of goods and raw materials, the political and legal structures of regulation and trade, the physical and commercial apparatus of markets, the organizations of instrumentation of communication, the techniques of banking and finance. These too would have already had to be of the character that could accommodate increased commodity production. Their appearance was hardly instantaneous. On the contrary, their formation was organically determined by the economic development of previous centuries. Moreover, it is probable, as I.E. Monson has argued, that the appearance of industrial production was neither revolutionary in the sense of a sudden catastrophic change, nor uniquely British. From the technological point of view, it may be said that the 18th century witnessed little that was really revolutionary, and that the earlier Industrial Revolution was, in fact, based largely on previous advances. Even the steam engine was a product of the 16th and 17th century, scientific theory and experiment, while in other fields, older techniques, such as water-powered machinery, were developed and extended. The majority of these technological developments from the late Middle Ages onward appears to have been introduced into England from the continent. Muson's interpretation is not generally shared, nor are the facts he marshals to support his arguments generally known. This is in large part a consequence of the tendency of most historians and analysis of the process of industrialization to proceed along national and much less frequently subcontinental, i.e. Western European lines. Indeed, it is by no means rare for the readers to encounter in otherwise very careful studies the statement in some form that the Industrial Revolution occurred in England, a popular proposition which appears to stem from the confusion of the point of origins of technical rationalization for the sake of production with practical mechanical inventions, and a further confusion of a national economy with the ultimate impact of practical invention of an economic system already extensively characterized by international production, i.e. English cotton sugar. Regardless of systematic and detailed study of the technical and social consequences of industrial production is still largely located in its historiography of late 18th and early 19th century Britain. Though one should note that E.G. Hobsbawm was certainly correct that it could be more accurate to envision several industrial revolutions occurring subsequent to the initial period of industrial age. So they're talking about multiple. Okay, you're talking about multiple there. That it wasn't just one thing. It was a series of things that developed. Okay.
We're saying it was like in multiple spots too. Like It wasn't just in Britain. It was in multiple spots at the same time.
Yep. Property and industrial capitalism. Poverty and industrial capitalism. For the working classes in Great Britain, the immediate and terrible consequences of the industrial age are generally, if not precisely, known. In purely economic terms, there is a direct evidence of the workhouses that began in the 18th century, which were shitty, but achieved their more permanent character in the 2 decades following Reverend Robert Lowe's experiment in deterrent welfare in 1818 in Bingham. Though pauperism, which Hobsbawm defines as, quote, the permanent core of poverty, end quote, as we have suggested earlier, was by no means a new phenomenon in England or Western Europe. Before the 18th and 19th century, in England, at last, the number of paupers increased somewhat rapidly during this later period. It seems to have been the direct result of both the interruption of rural life by adoption of reaping and threshing machines, and by the policies of land enclosures inspired by agricultural capitalism that between 1760 and 1810 included 5 million acres of common fields. Elsewhere in the industrial cores, unemployment accompanied the severe business cycles of the period. The workhouses, whose truest function was to act as asylums of last resort for the poor, was one response of the ruling classes. Characteristically, this response was a rationalization of an almost total misperception of the basis of pauperism and the presumption that the dispossessed and the unemployed lacked work discipline. The reoccurring cycles of unemployment in the first half of the 19th century were of the scale to give any observer pause. Hobsbawm's comments on the slum of 1826 and Henry Mayhew's observation of the rise of unemployment that would persist from 1846 to 1851 are instructive. Hobsbawm found the figures to start so startling that they could bear a good deal of deflation. They suggest that in the hard-hit areas of Lancashire, between 30 and 75% of the total population might have been destitute in the course of this slum. In the woolen areas of Yorkshire, between 25% and 100%. In the textile areas of Scotland, between 25% and 75%. In Salford, for instance, half the population was wholly and partly out of work. In Bolton, about 1/3 of Burnley, at least 40%. That's a high fucking unemployment rate. Yet what Hobsbawm, I can't say his name, as a historian found difficult to accept, Mayhew, as a contemporary observer, describes by E.P. Thompson as incomparably the greatest social investigator in the mid-century. Found matters of fact, estimating the working class as being between 4 to 5 million in number. I think we may safely assert, considering particular times, seasons, fashions, and accidents, and the vast quantity of overwork and scamp work. The number of women and children continually drafted into the different handicrafts. There is barely sufficient work for the regular employment of half or of our laborers, so that only 1.5 million are fully and constantly employed, while for 1.5 million more are employed only half their time, and the remaining 1.5 million wholly unemployed, obtaining a day's work occasionally by the displacement of some of the others. Moreover, when we are informed by Hobsbawm, can't say his name, that pauper houses in the purposely punitive workhouses of the 19th century, though themselves victims of the applied disgust of their social and economic superiors, probably ate substantially better than significant proportions of farm laborers and urban workers. We are chastened from the too easily presumed distinctions between employed and unemployed labor and pauperism. All three constitute an underclass that extended into the ranks of skilled workers. Further evidence of the industrial age impact on the British working class and the poor is to be found in the studies of housing. The term would presumably apply to conditions of survival ranging from the makeshift night shelters in the doorways, alleys, cellars, and streets of the towns and in open fields beside village roads, the parish of union workhouses themselves and the worker cottages. Structures quite different concretely and subjectively from the beginning of pastoralism now associated with the term. Morbidity, mortality, child labor, and physical conditions of labor, and food consumption. In general, the more reliable the data, the more firm is the impression of a progressively depressed population during the period under discussion. Still, so they're saying through the revolution, Still, all these figures are in some sense superficial, though helpful for sensing. The real issue that is the experience of the work of the men, women, and children who made up the English poor and working classes. What did they make of their lives? Sorry, everybody. Much of what can be measured is merely the condition of their lives and not their social, moral, and ideological content. The objective conditions, rhythms, and patterns of the proletarianization of England labor framed that experience, but do not determine it. Thus, the social eruptions of that class have persistently resisted the monolithic coloration. In 1930, J.L. Hamad, who along with his colleagues, Barbara Hammond, contributed. What?
We have a town named after them in the state. It's Hammond.
Oh, thank you. Contributed to so much to the history of British labor, put this point well enough to be repeated. If we are considering the kind of social life that was created by the Industrial Revolution, we find that in one sense, no class of working people escaped the Industrial Revolution. For all workers alike, there was the same want of beauty, the same want of playing fields or parks, the same want of pageants or festivals, the same speeding up of industry, the same absence of anything calculated to create that Sophocles called the temper that buildeth a city's walls. The ugliness of the new life, with its growing slums, its lack of beautiful buildings, its destruction of nature, and its disregard of man's deeper needs, infected not this or that class of workers only, but the entire working class population, in terms of the happiness and unhappiness of men and women. Hammond would write elsewhere, quote, "If you look at the life of the age of the Industrial Revolution, you are struck at once by its extraordinary poverty." So the revolution was great, but it brought on more disparity and poverty. Wild. The reaction of English labor. Hammond's view of the sort of concerns that focus the minds of the laboring classes as they came face to face with the dislocation of the industrial world is in part substantiated by the political and social movements among the underclass that so distressed the upper and middle classes of the earliest moments of this period. In 1831, James Mill had written to an association, quote, "Nothing can be conceived more mischievous than the doctrines which have been preached to the common people. One quite obvious expression of working class anger towards the impoverishment of their social lives, and as Hammond called it, imagination, quote unquote, is the movement to which Hobsbawm refers as machine breakers, distinguishing between those movements where attacks on the private property and machinery, or tactics designed to force concession for employers, and those movements energized by workers concerned not with technical progress in the abstract, but with the practical twin problems of preventing unemployment and maintaining the customary standards of life, which include non-monetary factors such as freedom and dignity. Hobsbawm linked the revolts that echoed the ideas initially, recorded some of the Spitalfields weavers in 1675. Hobsbawm tells us of successive generations of weavers in Spitalfields rioting in 1719, quote, against wearers and printed calicos, end quote. In 1736, and again in the 1760s against machines. In 1778 and 80s, machine breakers appeared in Lancashire. Ludism proper appeared in 1802, peaked in the 1811 to 1813 period, and spinning jennies before largely disappearing after the suppression of the farm labor machine breakers in 1830 in the southern counties, in East Anglia and the Midlands. More interestingly, These leaditude movements not
Luddite.
only, oh my gosh, you
It's
scared me.
Luddite.
Not only reflected the resistance to the machine as a tool of capitalist production on the part of the workers, but also served to reveal the existence of a broader social hostility to capitalist industry. The fully developed capitalist entrepreneurs formed a small minority. The small shopkeepers or local masters did not want an economy of limitless expansion, accumulation, and technical revolution. His ideal was the dream of all, quote, little men, which was found periodic expression in Levier's Jeffersonian and Jacobin's radicalism. A small-scale society of modest property owners and comfortably off wage earners without great distinctions of wealth or power. It was the unrealizable ideal, never more so than in the most rapidly evolving societies. Let us remember, however, that those to whom it appealed in early 19th century Europe made up the majority of the population, and outside such industries as cotton, of the employing class. A more critical confirmation of Hammond's thesis on the significance that must be attached to the subversion of the social and cultural entombment. How do you say that word? Integument, yeah, of the feudal society in Britain by the imposition of industrial production is suggested elsewhere. It would appear that the ideological and social response of the English working class to the imminent domination by a new social order was not restricted to class-specific or economistic behaviors. This class consciousness of English workers did not strictly adhere to the logic of working class formations premised in capitalist exploitation and modeled by Marx from the histories of the French and the English bourgeoisie. Indeed, the more profound reaction of an industrial capitalist order found among English producers in the 18th and 19th century largely deterred their political and social consequences of proletarianization of that had already become the dogma of English radical thought and expectations in the years immediately following. The Great Revolution in France, the development of Anglo-Saxon chauvinism, the earliest form of English nationalism, and the appearance of rather extreme forms of racism among the English working class determined the form of characteristics that English working class consciousness assumed. The parochialism and ethnocentrism and race hostility constituted a response that was both a native of an consequence to the loss of pre-capitalist social integration. Of the first Anglo-Saxon chauvinism, George Rood would note, one of the most remarkably persistent beliefs of all was the perfect liberties had existed under Saxon kings, and that these had been filched together with their hands for freedom, for freeborn, Englishmen by invading Norman knights under William the Bastard in 1066. This myth of Norman yoke persisted until Chartist times, 1840s, and was handed down by generations of Leviers, Whigs reared on revolution principles, London 18th century radicals and Democrats nurtured on the more recent doctrines of popular sovereignty and the rights of man. The existence of this constantly reoccurring theme of popular ideology in English social history eventually took the form of nationalism, but more particularly as the nationalism incorporating the virulent xenophobia. The processes behind the appearance of the radically conscious working class nationalism required some rather close attention, if for no other reason than that they have been obscured in radical English histories written appropriately as responses to works less sympathetic to the less comprehensive of the conditions of struggles of the English industrial working class. English society was the first to have developed the industrial proletariat among its working classes, yet will before the peak of latude, and Chartist protest, and during the heyday. Thank you. And during the heyday of earlier Owenite socialism, the supranationalist. I gotta look up the word. So Owenites, those are the
supranationalists.
Yeah, Owenites are the utopian socialists, by the way. Classes identity that Thompson has noted among English workers and in the heroic culture they produced between the French Revolution and the defeat of Chartism, while demonstrating its erratic course, had begun to retreat before, proto-nationalism. This was one aspect of the lost vision of the English working classes in the 1830s, and one that Thompson was forced to reluctantly reorganize. It is easy enough to say that this culture was backward looking or conservative. True enough, one direction of the great agitations of the artisans, of the outworkers continued over 50 years, was to resist being turned into a proletariat. When they knew that this cause was lost, they reached out again in the 30s and the 40s and sought to achieve new and only imagined forms of social control. This idea of capitalism is not working too well. but they persisted, that's for sure. It would reappear in the mid 1860s, but by then what would become the general labor union movement replaced an earlier and implicit consciousness of class struggle for political power, had so progressed as to be so much under the sway of labor bureaucrats that not even the direct intervention of Marx was sufficient to more than briefly deflect English working class consciousness from nationalism, despite the evidence that in 1864, the year of the founding of the International Working Men's Association, the IWMA, or First International, spokesmen for British Labour addressed themselves publicly to what Rendon Harrison characterizes as the national liberation and unification movement in America, Italy, and Poland. By 1871, more persistent thrusts of trade unionism was once more dominant. In 1871, Marx was opposed to the attempt at a proletarian revolution in Paris, but when it was made, his loyalty to the working class and his own past record left him to choose but to give it his unflinching support. By identifying the International with the Commune, Marx occasioned the break with the majority of English labor leaders and sealed the fate of the IWMA, a course of action from which there was no honorable release. Marx and the English trade unions leaders disowned each other. The formulation of an explanation for the revival and dominance of trade union consciousness among the English working classes is not a simple task. For one, it must take account of what Thompson termed the counter-revolution of the dominant classes that struck such decisive blows to working class radicalism in 1834, 1835, and 1848. It must also encompass the historical process by which industrial forms of production were established in England, including the patterns of labor recruitment from the villages and countrysides of England, and the subsequent forms of work discipline established the proletarianized and recruits. The division of labor that characterized the international structures of British capitalism, but perhaps most important to the understanding of the evolution of working class nationalism in Britain. And more to the issue here is the role another nationalism, Irish nationalism, played in the formative period of English working class development and its concomitant construction of English working class culture. Moreover, the part played by Irish workers in the revolt of English labor in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, being the social and historical expression of Irish nationalism, must also be noted. All right, so that they're having problems there. The earlier revolutions, the earlier rebellious times. All right, and now we're into the Irish nationalism. So now we're going into the next session of the colonization of Ireland. England did colonize Ireland. So that was their first testing grounds. As far as the English ruling class might have been concerned, the 19th century was inaugurated by the Irish Rebellion in 1798, having already served the American and French revolutions, the immovable object, Ireland, and what the English termed, quote, the Irish question, became, quote, the biggest issue in late Victorian politics, as perhaps it had been for most of the century. In any case, their response to what they perceived as a particular pernicious manifestation of Jacobin conspiracy and French interference was to dissolve what had passed for an Irish parliament to be declared in 1800 an act of union between Ireland and the United Kingdom. In effect, the English state was setting aside the ineffective structures and instruments of indirect rule for those of a more direct or familiar domination. This substitution of one set of institutions for another, in a long view, proved to be indifferent for the purpose of the English state, though it logically followed the evident interests of English capital and Anglo-Saxonist ideology. The Irish question became much more a part of the 19th century than it had been for the 18th. It would appear, however, that its character had been fixed long before. James Anthony Frody.
1 second. Hi, Dudley, no problem. We're at the bottom of page 88.
Yeah. James Anthony Frody, in his history of the English in Ireland, provided his readers with what is both a detailed political history and a demonstration of the extent and sort of images of the Irish that had become fixed in the minds of Englishmen. Froude began by informing his readers that when the military aristocracy of the Normans invaded Ireland in the 12th century, quote, the Irish were, with the exceptions of the clergy, secretly better than a mob of army eswards. Having defeated the defenders of the island, Froude continues, the Normans had three courses of action towards the conquered people: extermination, armed occupation, or armed colonization. The Normans, Froude laments, chose an entirely different path. Now we're on page 98 at the beginning. The Normans, in occupying both England and Ireland, were but fulfilling the work for which they were specially qualified and gifted. They did not destroy the Irish people. They took the government of them merely as merely as the English have done in India, dispossessing the chiefs, changing the loose order and inheritance into an orderly succession, giving security to life and property, and enabling those who cared to be industrious to reap the fruits of their laborers without fear of outrage and plunder. Their right to govern lay in their capability of governing and in the need of the Irish to be governed. The end result was an unfortunate one for the civilizing mission of the Normans. Instead of extending English civilization to the inhabitants of the island, the conquered people absorbed their Norman rulers radically, culturally, and politically. By the second half of the 14th century, England having undergone the disastrous detail above judicial and political attempts to ensure a specifically Anglo-Norman presence in the four counties of the English Pale, Dublin, Meath, Kildare, and Louth, were in actuality indications of the futility of the design that had followed the conquest. Indeed, the term conquest was a conceit of English political history with respect to their political relations with England, Ireland, and more precisely the Pale, staggered between indirect rule and home rule depending on the resources of English state, the preoccupation of English feudal societies, and the capacity to proclivities of various feudal lords in Ireland to command national or English loyalties. In brief, such was the situation until the 16th century in economic and often in political terms. Feudal Ireland was almost entirely independent from England. This mode of English sovereignty in Ireland was to be initially pierced during the reign of Henry the Seventh, 1485 to 1509, and finally reshaped together during that of Henry the Eighth, 1509 to 47. Between these first two kings of the Tudor dynasty, 1485 to 1603, English policy towards Ireland managed to produce a bizarre series of results: an administrative unification of Ireland under the Earl of Kildare, a Celticized Norman family, and the fomenting of a rebellion led by Kildare as a champion of Catholicism, following the rupture of the English state with the Papists.
It means with the Pope and the Catholic Church.
Oh, Papias. Yeah, with the suppression of rebellion and the execution of some of its leaders. A new subjugation of Ireland and its most powerful families. The stabilization of English feudal monarchy had brought with it the possibility of transforming Ireland into an English colony. Once Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, was established on the English throne following the brief and chaotic reign of her siblings, Edward the Sixth, 1547 to 53, and Mary the First, 1553 to 58, English policy towards Ireland, not for the first or last time, changed dramatically. The English set upon the plan of putting Ireland to plantations as the best means of subdue the island. The most extensive of these plantations was to be that the Londonderry, established in 1608 and roughly contemporaneous to the Virginian plantation, Englishmen and lowland Scotsmen were lured to Ireland by the promise of free land. Their job was to drive the Irish into the woods and fortify their own village. The suppression of the rebellions that followed, the major rebellions, were led by Shane O'Malley in 1559 and Fitzgerald of Desmond between the years of 1568 and 83, and by O'Neill and former Earl of Tyrone and O'Donnell from 1594 to 1603, requires such extensive expenditures that at least one historian, R.D. Edwards, surmises that, quote, the poverty of the crown, which was a serious factor in the 16th century conflict with Parliament, as was at least in part due to the commitments over Ireland. Okay, hold on, I gotta do another appeal. Hold on. So many appeals. So many appeals. Okay. Whether this was the case or not, a more lasting pacification of Ireland was not achieved until the final years of Elizabeth's reign, despite the persistence of legends which put it otherwise. The reputation of Elizabethan settlers, one for the most part, in other fields remained but their Irish enterprise, lacking all sustained sense of purpose, proved deservedly, how do you say that?
Deservedly.
Transient, yeah. And so transient. And so in succeeding centuries, the sombre tale of plantations of rebellion, the Cornwallian violence of civil and religious wars, of the penal code, mocking the illusions of the final Elizabethan settlement. Elizabethan settlement. That's so hard. All right, let's see what time it is. Okay, hold on. 91. Hold on. Can you remember 91?
Well, since I'm on that page, yes.
Oh, we're done. Hold on. No. One more page. We're done. Okay. Thought. And my reading is starting to get scattered and shit. So I'm like, bleh, bleh, bleh. Though it was Elizabeth's administration that had initiated the policy, it was under James I, 1603 to 25, that the colonization of Ireland made planters and farmers from Scotland and the western counties of England assume significant proportions, first in Ulster, and then proceeding to the alienation of Irish land in North Wexford, Longford, and Leitrim. By 1641, that is in the midst of the reign of James' successor, Charles I, 1625 to 49, William Petty, the 17th century English economist and statistician, would estimate that there were 260,000 undertakers, as the Protestant colonialists were called, among the 1.5 million people living in Ireland. It was also in this year that the Irish rebelled again, mounting the most serious and lethal effort to reject English rule since the conquest. In English historiography, this rebellion became known as the Massacre of 1641. This rebellion was to last for 11 years. A fire that ultimately had to be attended to by Cornwall himself. The following was that Fraud, with advertent irony, would have us know was the penal era, 1652 to 1704. It would be during this later period that Ireland assumed the characteristics that typified the Irish experience until the early 12th century. Colonized absentees, land ownership, Catholic persecution, and Protestant privilege, the land alienation of its laboring classes, the corruption of punitive administration and official terror. it was again during this penal era that much of the restrictive legislation written by English Parliament would appear to complete the de-rationalization of the Irish economy, acts against the marketing of Irish cattle in England, 1681, against Irish woolens and colored linens, 1699, and against glass, 46. Once these policies had accomplished their purpose, free trade could be reestablished. By 1801, free trade between Great Britain and Ireland was a reality. However, Irish industries, with one exception, linen, could not withstand the English competition. After the Union, Ireland therefore became more rural, more agricultural, more economically specialized than it had been previously. Ireland had been transformed into a dependent sector of the English economy. Such were the historical experience that informed Irish nationalism in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. The psychic and intellectual character of the Irish worker who immigrated to England in the 18th, 19th century to complement the labor of the emergent English proletariat were determined to a large extent by these same events. Certainly, the social and political relations of the immigrant Irish worker with their English counterpart were severely constrained by the past consisting of almost unmitigated hostility between interests that had come to be identified with their respective national entities. And we'll stop there. So we're looking at them expanding.
92.
We're looking at the expansion of the English capitalism. So I think we're starting with learning about how like these factors in Europe went into capitalist production and now we're specifically on the English production, and now we're going to how they expanded into Ireland and take over Ireland and basically colonize it.
Yes. I am quite interested in learning more about that. And I knew about the Protestant and Catholics fighting. I didn't know that the Normans had taken over Ireland at some point, but that's cool. That's cool to learn.
That's not cool.
No, it's not cool what happened to them, but it's cool to learn because I've never learned these things.
Yeah. They're going to go briefly over it, and then they're going to go over how contentious they were before they were deemed white. So this is before they got white status in the racial hierarchy. So they're still not seen as quote white or seen as like English, because English would be the dominant working class.
Well, they were Anglo-Saxon at the time.
Yeah, but they're English. So.
Right, but the English were known as Anglo-Saxon.
Yes, they're both. Those two things are both correct. Both are correct. Both are correct.
Hello.
Hey, what's up? Let me go. Hold on, before you go. I should have done this earlier. Hold on. Come on, turn on. All right, what's up? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, based on what I have heard already, it sounds like the conditions of colonialism are what furthered the conditions for capitalism to arise.
They both work in tandem with each other. One is an expansion. One takes over the whole peoples, displaces them, destroys their culture, destroys anything, and then takes over and underdevelops their economy, this is like a bit of imperialism in a sense. So like it's that, and it's two things at once, because they want to expand their markets. That's another reason why they did colonialism, to expand markets for their own interests and profits too. Yeah. Capitalism utilizes colonialism as a function to be able to expand and extract.
And because capitalism is has an easier easier to gain power type of power structure, but it's based off of exploitation. It furthers it because people try to gain power to fight against, and then they end up just doing more of what the system is. I hope that makes sense.
Sure. Could you elaborate just a little bit further on that? The system is what? What is the system?
The system is the entirety of it, not just a singular
Which system?
not a singular system. It's the interaction of multiple systems, whether it be capitalism, imperialism, colonialism.
But this specifically is engaging with capitalism and colonialism. So we know the specific systems and how they engage with other demographics of people and working class people.
Yes.
Yeah. So we know that we can bring an identity to the systems that are utilizing this instead of utilizing as vague systems, because they're not vague. They're identifiable. They have made their identity out of the rise of their development, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to be vague. I was just saying, like, there's more to what is usually called the system than just one system.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, like I understand that colonialism has been around and imperialism has been somewhat of a form, but like we're talking about the epic and the history of capitalism that utilizes and expands those things to be able to interlink with capitalism development and expansion. So they take that, like, hey, let's do this and incorporate it into our system. Let's take this and incorporate it into our system. You know what I mean? And then like we can do all the things that you just talked about. Yeah. Did I?
Yeah, like...
Is that... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, like capitalist imperialism is what is being talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I would say that colonialism might have been a different formation, a different type of character underneath feudalism and like other systems of exploitation and alienation. You know what I mean? I would say it forms and transforms into a different character when it's brought together with capitalism. Just, what do you think? Tell me what you think.
The type of colonialism that is being dealt with now has a lot more characteristics added onto it than
No. The character. Like a human being has a character about themselves, right? And through the development of a human being, that character can change, right?
Yeah, and
that's what I'm saying.
I'm saying that it's a similar character as to what it was before, but it has stuff added onto it now because of I would say it has. I would say it has like as capitalism has the birthmark of feudalism. I would say yes, there's a little bit of essences from the previous advancements and development. There's always a lingering essence or a lingering what do you call it? A residue that sticks, right? So yeah, I can agree to that too. You know, baby shark do 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 do. Oh, sorry, that was Spencer, by the way. But yeah. I don't know what I was going to say. Forgot. Okay. Do you have any other things that was this? Do you feel satisfied? Do you want to go into more, or did we satisfy and become and create a unity between you and me, Doodley? Did we create a unity? I feel satisfied.
Okay, let's make sure. Feel satisfied. Yeah. I think I can't wait till we get to. Let's see. What's the next thing? We're going to go into the United States. You know, I think these are a progressive form of historical materialism that's happening with us right now. You know what I mean? Because we're going to get into the United States. You're going to learn more about the rebellions in the United States and stuff like that. It's going to be great. It's really good. English working class consciousness and the Irish worker. So now we're going to look at the distinctions between the Irish worker and the English worker. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, is there anything else that you want to bring on before? You want to bring anything else to light, to the table?
Not that I know of. I wasn't here
No,
for that
no.
long.
Oh, no worries. No new discoveries. What about you, Joe? Before we close out, any discoveries you'd like to bring to the table that we can talk about?
No, I'm good. I said my stuff at the beginning.
Okay. Is everybody enjoying the book so far?
Yes, I am enjoying the book.
Good.
So,
Dudley, for what you've heard?
Yeah, from what I heard, yeah, I'm liking the book.
Okay. Did you stay up too late yesterday?
I wasn't able to fall asleep.
Okay, cool. Well, that's cool, Rachel. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Thank you so much for enjoying it. But anyways, I think today, Two Spirit and Chicken Strips are doing a reading today. Is it called History of the Indigenous People?
history. It's the one that I read. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the one I just finished reading in the class. So
Yeah, they're gonna read it. They're gonna read it online and stuff. It's about like 11 chapters, so it'll be a decent read. If you want to learn more about the indigenous perspective and the indigenous things, and you want to learn about, it's important for us as communists to learn about the indigenous perspectives and stuff like that. It is important for us. We can put two spheres together easily, and still be objective and material. You know. All right. Well, I will let you go. I'm probably going to be late to that because I have a meeting at 9:30. And then after that meeting, I hope it's only a half hour, I'm going to read my book, C.L.R. James's Dialectics on Notes on Dialectics, which has been fucking brilliant. I love it so far. So, and then I'll come to that if they're still alive. Okay? All right. If no one else anything to say, I will go ahead and say goodbye. Thank you, Dooley, for coming in. I hope you can make it tomorrow, and so with you, Joe.
Yeah,
I'll
much
be
love.
here.
Take
Love
care.
y'all.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. I love y'all.